I never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Fine, I'm not.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. It is a hump day Wednesday, and of course that means it's time for another weekly top 10 countdown, and it's just about Halloween time. So if you have any top 10 requests that has something to do with Halloween, please feel free to let me know. I know last year I did 2 or 3 Halloween based top 10 countdowns, I believe. Don't mind doing those again, because the kind that I did you can really do every year, because the voting's going to change every year, because people's opinions change every year. So I can always do those again. But today's top 10 countdown is actually by request, because for those of you who do not know, besides here on this YouTube channel, I do a weekly podcast, and all we talk on there is racing and wrestling. And I actually got a request from a fan who listens to that podcast that wants me to do top 10 all-time best wrestling managers. And when I do managers, it's people who were strictly managers who pretty much made a living out of managing. There's a couple of them on the list who wrestled for a short time, but they realized that wasn't quite their thing, and they gave up wrestling to become a manager. I'm not going to use somebody like Johnny Polo, who was a manager for a year or two and then spent the rest of his career as a wrestler. I'm not going to use somebody like Harley Race, who didn't become a manager until after his in-ring career ended. This is people who either spent all of their career as a manager or most of their career as a manager. Just like in the refereeing world, for those of you who do not know, Jim Ross actually started out as a referee in the early 70s. But if I was going to do a top 10 countdown about best all-time referees, I wouldn't use him. Not that he was a terrible referee, but he refed for a couple of years and then became an announcer. I would use guys who either spent all their career as refs or most of their career as refs. Same way in the managing world. So without further ado, by request, let's go ahead and do top 10 all-time best wrestling managers. And most of these are from the 90s and up, so you're going to know most of the names on this list, but there are a couple of them that go back to the 70s and 80s. But if you're a long-time wrestling fan, you know who they are. If you don't, I encourage you to go watch some of their stuff. Number 10, Gary Hart. Now, Gary Hart was a manager for a long time. If you've never seen Gary Hart, go watch some classic WCCW or some classic NWA and find out all about Gary Hart. Number 9 was Miss Elizabeth, and she was fantastic back in the days of WCW, and of course she left us way, way, way too soon. Number 8 was the guy they called Classy, and that was Freddie Blassie. Number 7, J.J. Dillon, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, J.J. Dillon is actually still to this day making sporadic wrestling appearances. But if you've seen late 80s, early 90s NWA, you know all about J.J. Dillon. Number 6, Paul Bearer. I really ain't got to give any details as to who Paul Bearer is. Of course, before he was Paul Bearer, he was actually Percival Pringle back in the day. And there are some people who actually thought that his real name was Percy Pringle until he died a few years back. Then they realized, oh wait, that wasn't his name either. Before we talk about the top 5, let's recap 10 through 6. Gary Hart, Miss Elizabeth, Freddie Blassie, J.J. Dillon, and Paul Bearer. And this again is top 10 best all-time wrestling managers by request. Number 5, she was known as Sensational. She was known as Sister, but I wrote down Sensational Sherri. She was around for a long time, and no matter who she was with, she was very, very good. Number 4 was the guy that everybody called the Mouth of the South, and that was Jimmy Hart. Now, Jimmy Hart, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be 80 years old coming up in January, but that man does not age. I watched an interview with him probably 5 or 6 months ago, and he looks exactly the way he looked years ago when he was managing Hulk Hogan, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be 80 years old, I think, on New Year's Day, as a matter of fact. Number 3, Jim Cornette. Now, you'll probably never meet or hear about a worse human being than Jim Cornette, but as a manager, he was absolutely fantastic. Of course, everybody knows him with the Midnight Express, but he was around for a long, long time. Number 2, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and I personally thought that Bobby Heenan was just as good of a commentator as he was a manager, but Bobby Heenan was one of the guys on this list that actually started out as a wrestler, and you can go back to the mid-60s and find some footage of him wrestling, but he didn't wrestle for very long, and then he became a manager, and he was fantastic at it. It's a shame his health got so bad before he died, because now you see pictures about every birthday or every anniversary of the day he died of him in his last days, and I wish people wouldn't show those. I wish they would show pictures of him back when he was commentating or managing, because the last year or two of his life, people should not show those pictures. He looked bad. And number 1, in my personal opinion, is Paul Heyman. I don't think there'll ever be a manager as good as Paul Heyman. The reason he's number 1 in my book is because there's never going to be anybody on the microphone as good as Paul Heyman. That man can go out there and have no idea what he's going to say and no idea what to talk about, and still go out there and make you so mad you want to shoot your TV out for 20 minutes. But that's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. And I've also got him number one because of the longevity of his managerial career. He just turned 58 years old, so he's still fairly young. So he might do this for 5 or 10 more years. And he started out as Paul E. Dangerously when he was only like 22 years old. So the man's been around for a long time. But also, to me, he's the best manager as far as just being a manager. A lot of the guys on this list were good, but whoever they managed, they tried to interfere in every match they were in and made themselves too much of the match. And managers are not supposed to do that. A manager, in my opinion, is supposed to be like a referee. You're supposed to be there and you're supposed to support your person, but you're not supposed to be in the way and not supposed to draw attention to yourself. And a lot of these guys on this list did that. Paul Heyman never really has. He goes out there and talks, but when the folks he manages wrestle, he stays in the background and lets them wrestle. And that's what a manager is supposed to do. If you go out there and wrestle and people recognize your manager more than they recognize you, then your manager is doing too much. That's just my personal opinion. And that was Top 10 Best All-Time Wrestling Managers by request. I always enjoy taking requests. Any thoughts on it? Please feel free to let me know. Homes for Our Troops is a publicly funded 501c nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans. Since the 2004 inception, nearly 90 cents of every dollar spent has gone directly to our program services for veterans. Visit at hfotusa.org. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. What did Michael Jackson name his denim store? Billy Jeans. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.